Hi, everyone. Good morning. If we haven't met before, my name's Mark, and I am one of the pastors on staff. And it's not just good morning to you guys in the room. It's also a good morning to those of you at all of our campuses, the Battleground campus, East Vancouver campus, Central Vancouver campus. Thank you for being with us today. Now, before we get going, a couple things. The first one would be, how many of you get competitive when you see a countdown clock on the screen? How many of you thought that survey was a little bit of a game to see how fast you could complete it? And how many of you completed it before the game even started? Okay, a couple hands. All right. I had an interesting experience with the survey today. You know, we've been doing them for years now. And I had to check the box that said 30s. And I didn't love the S next to 30s. I'm like, no, I'm 30. I don't want to be thrown into a whole group of people there. I want my own little category, okay? Someone said to me after the last service, they said, oh, you think that feels weird? Wait till there's no more boxes for the category. That doesn't feel fair. Like, fair. All right, understood. Hey, before we jump in, I was able to be at our middle school small group retreat for just a little bit this weekend, and wow, the Lord is doing something with our students. We've seen this kind of happening over a little while now, but there was over 180 middle school students at this, and just really blown away. I was so excited. I brought my daughter Sutton with me, and she's a year and a half, and I'm like, I can't wait for you to be in middle school and experience this. So why don't we just have you experience it early? Like, here you go, right? Experience the magic. But just as a new parent, I'm like, I cannot wait for my daughter to continue to grow up here at this church and experience what the Lord's doing with our students here. So just absolutely blown away. There was other really big news on Thursday. Maybe you saw the breaking news, which is that In-N-Out Burger is coming to Richfield, Washington. Yeah. Oh, clapping. Yeah. We had some of the largest amening ever at the news of In-N-Out Burger in the New Heights Gathering. Yeah, pretty exciting. If you don't know, I'm a big burger connoisseur, and in my ranking system, In-N-Out is the best fast food burger. I've done a lot of experience on that, so we can talk more, but I'm very, very excited about it. But listen, more important than that meal, we get to study a very important meal today as we enter into a new series called The Upper Room. Maybe you're not familiar with the title, The Upper Room, but it's a title for a group of chapters in the Bible. John chapter 13 through 17, and it's significant for two reasons. One, it's the longest conversation we have of Jesus. And it's kind of like those movies where the whole movie's in the same room the whole time. Like 12 Angry Men, if you've seen that movie. It's like the camera angle changes, but it's all in the same scene. And so we get to study Jesus' longest conversation that we have recorded. The other thing that makes it significant is its proximity to the cross. It's the night before Jesus dies. And he knows he's going to die. And so he's with his best friends. And there's some urgency and there's some clarity in what Jesus wants these guys to get before he leaves them. And so we thought as a church it would be a great opportunity for us to study the upper room together as we make our way to Easter. Just like the disciples were making their own way to Easter and they didn't even know it. And so we're going to look at that for the next couple weeks. We won't study the whole conversation, but we'll jump in and out and take it in different scenes. So today we're going to be in John chapter 13. Now, John chapter 13 has some context before we jump into it. And we can even go to the next slide there. In John chapter 13, here's what I want you to put in view, which are the disciples. And the disciples, their experience is kind of wild. You got to think about them for a second. They had different backgrounds, but some of them were fishermen, tax collectors, different professions. They lived in different places. And at some point in their life, they heard about this young Jewish rabbi named Jesus. Jesus was about 30 years old, about the time when he started showing up in these guys' lives. And he was traveling from synagogue to synagogue, and he was a guest speaker. He was a traveling rabbi that would teach these sermons. And he was so impressive in his delivery and in his message that his reputation was growing. And with that, he was doing miracles that demonstrated his divinity. And it was pulling a crowd. And eventually he came by these disciples' lives and invited them to leave their job, leave their town, and come and disciple an apprenticeship under him and learn from him. And these guys said yes. And so they followed him for about 3.5 years, and they were hoping it was going to turn into something more. And along those 3.5 years, each one of them had their own moments where they go, I think this guy is more than just a rabbi. And they began to say, maybe he's the Jewish Messiah. Maybe he's the one we've been waiting for. And they started to believe he was going to become a political figure that was going to reestablish the nation of Israel on the world map. And this really came to a head right before the upper room on Sunday when Jesus rode into town on a donkey. Rides in Jerusalem on a donkey, and it's a crazy scene. It's like a rock star coming to town. They were like ripping down palm branches. They were taking off their cloaks. They built a runway for him. He came into town with a runway, and they sang worship songs as he arrived. He was not afraid to demonstrate his king, right, coming in. And the disciples were high-fiving each other because their investment was paying off. This guy that we've attached ourselves to, he's going to become king of Israel. He's going to push out the religious leaders, and eventually he's going to overthrow the Roman oppression. And this guy's a walking cheat code. Like, we've seen him, calm storms. We've seen him bring people from dead back to life. Like, he can handle the Roman Empire. And so they're feeling pretty good because they're like, if this guy's king, that would make us, princes, right? Or generals. You think about some of the boys who were working up in Galilee, they're going from fishermen to generals, and they're feeling pretty good about it. And so it's in that context, in the upper room, as these guys sit down for a meal, Luke tells us that there was a debate that broke out amongst the disciples. And the debate was, who do you think's the greatest here? And they were arguing about which one of them they thought was going to be greater. Now, it looks a little ridiculous, but they were doing that because they want significance. They want to live a life that counts, and they believed they can make it count if they were connected to Jesus. And they're partly right. The problem is they kind of got Jesus wrong. They saw him as a political figure that was going to rule with an iron fist. And they thought, hey, and then my life will mean something because I'll gain more power and more influence. And just like them, we want to live lives of significance too. And maybe we think it's the same way. Maybe we think if we can gain some power and some influence, maybe if we can get a blue check next to our name on our Instagram profile, right? Maybe we've made it. If you want that blue check, I can help you get it. You just have to pay some money, okay? You don't even need more followers. But some of us think, maybe that's not it. Maybe it's a bucket list mentality. Once I can see the pyramids and eat a croissant in Paris, then my life has mattered, right? And we just got to get through the list. And once we get through the list, it's mattered. Or maybe it's with relationships and with our families. If I can get married, if I can have kids, and if I can have grandkids, and there's this legacy that can develop, then my life is counted for something. We all desire significance in our life, just like the disciples. Jesus sees them having this conversation. He enters into the middle of it, and he wants to teach them what significance is really all about. That's what we get to study today. So John chapter 13, you were handed a program when you came in today. You can slide those talk notes out if you want to use them. We'll go through it on the screen together. Okay, here's how John starts. Now, just right before I jump in, sometimes John will do this. He'll give us a summary sentence or two before he enters into a larger scene. So the upper room is, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, those chapters. And so he's going to give us a summary sentence as we make our way into the upper room. Here's what John tells us. It was just before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Okay, a couple things that John wants us to know. The first thing he wants us to know is that it's near the Passover festival. A couple times a year, the nation of Israel would do these festivals. There were 3 big ones where everyone would pilgrimage from their towns to Jerusalem and celebrate. The Passover was one of those. If you're a note taker, you could just write down the beginning of Exodus. You go study the book of Exodus that talks about when the nation of Israel were slaves in Egypt about 1,500 years before Jesus, and God delivered them out of slavery. And at the end of that, he instructs them to do this festival every year called the Passover Festival, where they remember God's deliverance. Okay, so they've been doing that, and that sets the scene for us. Okay, in Jerusalem, there was a lot of activity. It was a packed place. People had come from all over to celebrate the Passover festival. So it helps set the scene. The other thing that I think John is doing is he's trying to pull a little bit of focus to the cross. The Passover festival was remembering what God did at the end of delivering his people out of Egypt. If you remember, they were to kill a lamb, take the blood of the lamb, put it on the doorframe, and the last plague, the angel of death, would come and would pass over your house, and you would be protected by the blood of the lamb. Well, Jesus is hours away from dying on the cross. And the Passover, it doesn't just look back, it actually begins to look forward at the Lamb of God who dies in our place, and through the blood of that lamb, we experience the mercy of God. I think John's pulling that into focus for the reader a little bit. Okay, the second thing he wants us to know is that the hour had come. Well, what hour is John referring to? Well, he tells us, for Jesus to leave this world and go to the Father. So the hour had come, the time is up, Jesus is going to depart, and he's going to return to the Father. Now, you and I know that departure wasn't a pleasant departure, right? John is referring to the cross. The moment has come for Jesus to remain obedient to the Father's will all the way to the cross and to die for the world's sins. Okay, that moment is here. There is no more time. Okay? And then the third thing he wants us to know is that Jesus loved his people all the way to the end. All the way to the cross. He did not waver. He loved them all the way to the end. We are in the fourth quarter of John's gospel. There will be actually an overtime, right? But right now we're in the fourth quarter, and we're going to watch Jesus love his guys all the way to the very end. Okay? Now, we enter into the scene. Verse 2. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Okay, the first thing, the evening meal. So what meal is John talking about? Well, it's the Passover festival, so this would be the Passover meal. You might be familiar with this painting. This is the painting done by Da Vinci. This is him depicting this moment. I learned recently that this is a very large painting. I thought it was like a postcard size. I was wrong. It's like 30 feet by 12 feet. It's giant. But this is him depicting this scene that we're studying today. This is the Last Supper, right? So let's go back into it. John tells us the bad news first. And he brings up the devil. Every now and then in our Bible, God will pull back the curtain on the cosmic conflict that is at play. He doesn't do it a lot, but at key moments in the story, he wants us to remember that there is truly a spiritual opposition to God. At the beginning of our Bible, we're told that the serpent deceived Adam and Eve and put into motion the betrayal that humanity did towards God. At the end of our Bible, okay, from the first page to the last page, we're told that serpent, that great serpent, will be thrown into the lake of fire at this final judgment moment. And in between those two moments are these, there's not a lot of them, but there's a couple moments where God pulls back the curtain and he goes, I want you to remember there is a cosmic conflict at play. Why? Well, in this moment, right before the cross, John is reminding us this didn't happen because some guy named Judas wanted to make a couple bucks. That wasn't why this thing happened. No, this happened because the devil had prompted Judas into moving this thing happen. There is real spiritual opposition to God. Okay? Now, that person, the devil, he did have an agent. His agent is Judas. Judas is one of the 12 disciples, one of the people that have been following Jesus. And what John wants us to know is that he's already been prompted. The plan is already in motion. Potentially, at this moment, Judas has already made arrangements. He's been in Jerusalem for a little bit. Maybe he's already made arrangements with the spiritual leaders in Israel, right? The Jewish High Council, and begun to sell his intel on where Jesus would be so they could capture him. There's a chance that that is already in motion. The plan is already moving forward. And what is the plan for? It's the betrayal of Jesus. It's the moment where Jesus gets captured and leads to his death on the cross. Now think about Jesus for a second. He's aware of all of this. Here he is at this meal in this upper room with his disciples, and he knows these things are in motion. And there's Judas at the meal, and he knows what's going to happen, and he knows what it's going to lead to. And I'm wondering, why doesn't Jesus freak out? Why doesn't he lose his lid? Well, John tells us. He told us the bad news, then he tells us the good news, verse 3. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and he was returning to God. Okay, so the bad news is, the devil's plan is in motion. His agent has already started to have some conversation. The betrayal is on its way. That's the bad news. Here's the good news. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power. So all things are under the authority of Jesus. And all things would include the devil and Judas. There is no activity that the devil does that God goes, I didn't know he was going to do that. There's no moment where the devil surprises God. Even the evil schemes of Satan fit underneath the sovereignty of God. You might be familiar with the Martin Luther quote, where he says, yes, there is a devil, but he's God's devil. God can even use the schemes of Satan to accomplish his will. In fact, that's exactly what he's doing. This is part of the plan. Jesus knows that. The plan was for Jesus to come and to die for people's sin. So he's like, everything's part of the plan. It's moving the way it's supposed to move. Okay. The second thing that John tells us is that Jesus had come from God. And the third thing, that he was returning to God. What does he mean there? Jesus knows who he is. He knows exactly who he is. And because he knows who he is, he's not panicking in the pressure of the moment. It's a lesson for you and I. If we know who we are in Christ and our identity in Christ is secure and our faith in God is there, then when we experience our own panic in our own moments, we don't have to lose our lid because we know where our confidence lies. It lies in God, not in ourselves. And so Jesus isn't losing his lid. Now again, be back there in the scene because I want Jesus to behave a certain way. I want Jesus to get out of there. He knows that if he doesn't stop Judas from doing what he's going to do, then in just a couple hours, he's going to be captured. He's going to be mocked. He's going to experience an unfair trial. He's going to be beaten and tortured. He's going to have to carry a cross through the streets of Jerusalem with an exhausted body. And the same crowd that worshiped him is going to mock him and yell at him. And then he's going to get to the top of that hill, Golgotha. They're going to put that cross on the ground, and they're going to nail him to it, and gravity is going to do his work on his body. He knows all that's going to happen. And I'm like, then get out of there. Just ask the boys, who do you guys think the greatest is? Let them argue, and they're just like, dip out the window, Jesus. Just get out of there, right? Or at least take 11 of the guys and have them beat up Judas. Like, at least have them stop him. Like, tie him up. Don't go through that. He doesn't do any of that, though. Look what Jesus does. Look at verse 4. So Jesus got up from the meal. He took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He doesn't jump out the window. He doesn't tell the guys to grab Judas. Instead, he puts a towel around his waist, and he begins to wash their feet. Now, for us, we don't quite understand the practice of foot washing. That's because socks have been invented, okay? But this is a very disruptive moment in this dinner party. Because what Jesus does is not appropriate. It was not appropriate for a Jewish rabbi to get down and clean dirty feet. It wasn't even appropriate for a Jewish man to do this. And here is Jesus washing their feet. It would be like you and I having a party, and we got people coming over, and maybe we even have a guest of honor that we're really excited that's coming over to our house. So we get the house ready. Party happens. And the party's going on, and people are enjoying themselves. The bathroom's been used a couple times, right? And then this guest of honor makes their way into the kitchen. and they open up the drawers underneath the sink that you're not supposed to open up, that no one's supposed to look at, right? And they pull out soap, and they put on the long yellow rubber gloves. They take that bucket with them, and they make their way to the restroom. And you are panicking as a host. You're going, what are they doing? And they get in there, and they get on their knees, and they start to scrub and clean the toilet. How you feeling right about now? Right? Pretty uncomfortable. But they don't stop there. They then make their way to the master bedroom bathroom because they know you didn't clean that toilet, right? And they clean that. That's what Jesus is doing. It's very disruptive. But it's even more than that because Judas is still at the party. He's not just cleaning his friend's feet. He's cleaning the feet of the person who's going to betray him. I mean, think about that for a second. God is cleaning the feet of the one who's going to put into motion his crucifixion. We can't even fully feel the magnitude of that. And Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount or Sermon on the Plains, you're supposed to love your enemies. And now he's really doing it. It's this kind of love that turned the world upside down. It's this kind of love that changed everything. There's a famous story of Napoleon, the French general, emperor for a short season, right? At the end of his life, he was exiled. Because France was like, well, we can't kill him, but we don't want him influencing anything, so we'll just put him on a rock and he can die there. And it was there in that exile that he reflected on his life, his influence in his life, the significance of it, and he contrasted it with the person of Jesus. Here's what Napoleon said. He said, Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne, and I myself have founded great empires. But upon what did these creations of our genius depend? Upon force. Jesus alone founded his empire upon love. And to this very day, millions would die for him. There's Napoleon, who conquered the world, going, and no one will die for me. Later, he goes on to say, I know men, and Jesus Christ is no mere man. It was this demonstration, this sacrificial love with no expectations in return, even the love of your enemy, that broke the world. Now, you can imagine the disciples might have a reaction to what Jesus is doing. And it might not shock you that Peter's willing to speak up. Here's what Peter says. Jesus came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. Jesus is like, Peter, just sit down, please, not now, right? Just sit, come on, get back down, right? Peter's not going to sit back down. Verse 8, no, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. I picture Peter, Jesus is washing people's feet. And at some moment, Peter's like, let me just get up. And he goes to the back of the line. And he waits for Jesus to wash all their feet. Then Jesus gets to him and he goes, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm not like these JV disciples. They let you do that. I won't let you touch my feet, right? A little bit of false humility from Peter. And he's actually going to be rebuked for some of this stuff in just a moment later on in the chapter, okay? But Jesus responds to him and says, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Jesus says, unless you let me wash you, there will be no relationship for you and for me. Peter, you got to let me wash you if you want a relationship. Listen, Fridays are a special day in the Hartley home because it's a daddy-daughter day. My wife works on Fridays, and so I got Sutton all to myself on Friday. And it's a little chaotic, okay? There's a lot of Winnie the Pooh. There's no ponytails. I haven't learned that trick yet. And the sleep gown, that's on all day, all right, on Fridays, all right? We don't even try to put new clothes on her, all right? And then the infamous lunch hour comes around. That stresses me out. It might not surprise you, but I only have one option on my menu right now, which is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, okay? And so far, Sutton still likes them. So I make it for her. I feed her veggies first. I've learned you can't give her the sandwich first, otherwise she won't do the veggies. So we work through it. Then we get to the sandwich, and Sutton destroys that thing. She peels it. It's all over the place. She begins to use the peanut butter and the jelly as hair gel. I mean, it is everywhere, people. Eventually she goes, I'm all done. And she does this thing to me, right? She does the all done sign, and she's ready to go back to the couch, and she wants me flipping around and spinning around and doing all that. Except I actually like the clothes that I'm wearing. So I say to Sutton, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Just like Jesus. Okay. Now, for the parents in the room, you know, it can be hard to wash a 1.5-year-old that doesn't actually believe they're dirty. Right? That's a whole other activity. But it's the same with us in faith. The world wants to tell you, you don't need God's forgiveness. You just need to accept yourself. And the world doesn't want you to actually recognize your place before a holy God. And realize, no, I actually do need your forgiveness. I actually do need your mercy. I do need your grace. I do need to be washed by you. And Jesus says, yeah, if you reject that, then you cannot be in relationship with me. He is not interested in a casual relationship. We have to let him wash us. Now, you might imagine Peter has a reaction to this. Here's what Peter says. Then, Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Peter says, bathe me. He's such a great character. Jesus answered, those who've had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you is. For he knew who was going to betray him. And that was why he said not every one of you was clean. He's talking about Judas there. So yeah, Peter's already placed his faith in Jesus. Right? There's been moments throughout the story of Jesus where Peter declares who Jesus is. He's placed his faith in him. Jesus is like, yeah, that moment has happened. But there are more moments to come. God's not just interested in one moment in our life where we declare, yep, you're the person I need. He's looking for daily moments where we walk in relationship with him. A mentor of mine said, you can't walk around in this dirty world and not need Jesus to wash your feet every day. That's what Jesus is talking about here. Peter, every day you got to come to me and you got to experience this feet washing. You got to be in relationship with me in order for you to be the people that I want you to be. For the blank writers in here, you've been going crazy. You've been trying to crack the code on that. Some of you already filled them all out. You think you got them ready. Okay, so here's the first blank. Okay, giving love starts with receiving love. This is where Jesus starts. He's going to do even more instructions here. But he's telling his disciples, no, you got to come and have your feet washed by Jesus. The same person who wrote this story, John, he also wrote the letters of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. In 1 John, he says, we love because he first loved us. It begins there. It begins in experiencing God's love each and every day if we even want to pull off the same kind of love with other people in our life. This is the lesson I have to learn over and over and over again, where I get motivated to go love people the way Jesus loved me, and I go out and do it, and eventually I fall short of doing it, and then I'm exhausted, and I'm frustrated, and I'm like, my capacity is limited, and then my wife is reminding me, well, how's your time with the Lord been? And I'm like, what does that have to do with anything right now, right? Well, if you don't do that, good luck actually pulling it off. If you're not walking with him in prayer and in his word and in community, how you actually, it's not your capacity, Mark. It's God's capacity in you that actually pulls those things off. That's what Jesus is trying to teach his disciples. Now, Jesus sits down, and now he's going to go into kind of rabbi instruction mode for his disciples. Here's what he says in verse 12. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I've done for you, he asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. Okay, verse 15. I've set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Okay, look at these two greater thans. I think this is important because the disciples were just arguing about who's the greatest. And Jesus says, you want to be great? Get in line and put your servant towel on. Because I've just modeled for you what greatness looks like. It's serving other people with no expectations in return, right? Jesus didn't say, okay, I just washed your feet. Now each of you come by and wash mine. Right? No, that didn't happen at all. Instead, he sits down and says, now do with others as I have done for you. Here's that second blank. Serving is significant. It's so significant. Jesus invites each of us to adopt this posture that for the rest of my life, if I want to live a life of significance, then I'm going to find opportunities to put the servant towel on and serve other people. I've seen it in memorial services. Listen, the ones that are packed are for people who live their lives serving others. And the ones that are pretty much empty are the ones of people who live their lives serving themselves. You want to live a life of significance? Then serve people the same way God has served you. Now look at the way Jesus finishes this, verse 17. He says, now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them. This word blessed, this was a paradigm shift for me. Because I've never seen serving other people as a blessing for me. I've seen it as a blessing for them, but I've never seen it as a blessing for me. That's that third blank. Serving is a blessing, not a burden. You see, for me, I've seen it as a means to an end. Okay, I'll be the intern. I'll make your bagels. I'll make your coffee for you. And then maybe one day I'll get a job. And then I'll do your emails for you and you can delegate tasks to me. And then maybe one day I can sit in the seat you sit in and someone can make bagels for me and coffee for me. And I can delegate away. And then I have arrived, right? Or maybe you're a parent and you're like, I'm changing your diapers today, but one day you will change my diapers, right? Maybe it's a little bit of that. Maybe at some point, my kids will serve me. And I have come to this point where I've arrived. Jesus flips all that. And he says, no, it is a blessing to serve other people. That if you live your life in this posture and you look for opportunities to serve people, you will be blessed. Reading this, I was like, okay, all right. I want to start looking for opportunities where I can experience blessing. I want to look for opportunities where I can serve people. And you know what? They start popping up all over the place. I mean, I was like, in the morning, I'm applying this. And I didn't even have to wait till the morning. Because in the middle of the night, my daughter woke up crying. And I was like, uh-oh. Because usually my game plan has been, just pretend you're asleep. Nicole loves her more than you. Eventually her heart will break and she will get out of bed. I can outlast her for sure. And then I'll go back to bed. And that had worked pretty well for me, honestly, you know. And here I am, middle of the night. I hear something crying, and this is on my mind. And I'm going, it's a blessing. Now, I didn't hop out of bed with gee. I wasn't like, woo, opportunity. But I got out of there, and I'm like, okay, this is a blessing. God says this is a blessing. I'm going to go experience that. Go in the other room, grab Sutton, sit down. She's crying. Eventually get her to stop crying. All of a sudden, I find myself praying for my daughter. And I'm there with the Lord at 2 a.m. in the middle of the night. And I'm going, yeah, this is a blessing. And then I just started looking for it, and it's everywhere. It's with coworkers. It's with neighbors. It's with family members. There's opportunities to put the servant towel on each and every day. And if you do it, you get home at the end of the day, and you go, that's a good day. And if you don't, because you feel like you don't have enough margin in your life to actually help people out, and you got to run around, you get home at the end of the day and you're like, what a waste. The whole day was about me. But the days where I actually apply this, I feel like I'm walking closer to God than the other days. Man, it's a blessing when you put this on. There's a quote that I love from F.B. Meyer. He says this, I used to think that God's gifts were on shelves, one above another. And the taller we grow, the easier we can reach them. Now I find that God's gifts are on shelves, and the lower we stoop, the more we get. Isn't that great? Jesus finishes this whole conversation with these guys just in chapter 13. Here's what he says. He says, a new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. She says, you know how you tell the world that you belong to me? You tell the world by the way you serve them. And through that, they realize that you belong to me because the world doesn't live this way. The world keeps a scorecard and eventually wants to cash in on that scorecard. Jesus says, get rid of the scorecard. Love people the way I have loved you. And people will learn who you belong to when you do it. I want to finish this with a story about a guy named Henry Nouwen. Some of you might be familiar with that name. He was a Catholic priest. He was also a professor. And he got to the top of the charts when it comes to his academic career. Taught at Notre Dame for a while. Then he got to teach at Yale. And then he got to teach at Harvard. And while he was teaching at Harvard, he felt the Lord call him to do something crazy. He felt the Lord call him to move to Canada, to move into a facility as a chaplain to care for people that were mentally handicapped. And his colleagues and his friends thought he was crazy. They're like, you have worked so hard to get where you are. Why would you step off that mountaintop there? And he wrote about it. He has a reflection for it. I want to read it to you. Here's what he says. He says, the world says, when you were young, you were dependent and could not go where you wanted. But when you grow old, you'll be able to make your own decisions, go your own way, control your own destiny. But Jesus has a different vision of maturity. It is the ability and willingness to be led where you would rather not go. The way of the Christian leader is not the way of upward mobility in which our world has invested so much, but the way of downward mobility ending on the cross. This might sound morbid, but for those who have heard the voice of the first love and said yes to it, the downward moving way of Jesus is the way to the joy and the peace of God, a joy and peace that is not of this world. That is what each of us want, isn't it? We want that peace and that joy of God. And Jesus tells us, yeah, the way to get it is let me wash your feet every day, right? And then go love people the way I've loved you. And you will live a life of significance. I want to invite the band back out on stage here and at all of our campuses. I'd love to take a moment and just pray for us before we get a chance to respond in worship. Let me pray. Jesus, it is our desire, each and every one of us, we want to live a life that matters. We want to live a life that counts. And there's a lot of people and narratives that offer suggestions on what that significance looks like. And so, Lord, may we look to you and apply what you prescribe and model, Lord, that we would walk with you. And by walking with you, we would be compelled to love people the way that you have loved us. And Lord, may we not do that on our own strength. And if we do, it'll run out. But may we do that through your capacity, power of the Holy Spirit in our life, Lord, your presence in us. And as we do that, Lord, I know there's these moments where you get to recognize your presence with us along those moments. Just like me in that rocking chair. I was like, oh, you're here. And I would have missed that if I was lying in bed. And so, Lord, I do pray for each of us that as we put on the servant towel in the different environments you have for us, that we would have that same recognition. Ah, you're here. And that we get to do that with you and experience the blessing of it. God, we love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Why don't you stand? We'll sing together.